All right, so you ready for this? We're diving into the story of Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia, lover of the arts. And honestly, she always seemed to be a couple steps ahead of everyone else.
Oh, yeah, she did.
Now we're going to be using excerpts from her Wikipedia page as a starting point for this. And just a heads up, it's a pretty wild ride.
It really is. I mean, what makes Catherine's story so interesting is that her path to power, well, it wasn't exactly a straight shot. She was born Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst,
Okay.
a German princess from a pretty, minor family.
Let me do fancy.
Yeah, not exactly the typical background for someone who ends up ruling one of the biggest empires in history.
All right, so we've got this German princess who somehow ends up ruling Russia.
It's quite the story.
That's not exactly like the normal career path,
Yeah.
you know? How did she even manage that?
Well, it was really this fascinating mix of ambition and strategy, and I guess you could say a bit of luck, or good timing, I guess.
All right, so she was in the right place at the right time, but she also, made her own luck, it sounds like.
Exactly. So think about this. She shows up in Russia as a teenager, right?
Right.
Betrothed to the future Tsar, Peter III.
Okay.
And she doesn't just, sit around and, wait for things to happen.
She's not just going to be a wallflower.
No, not at all. I mean, she learns Russian, she embraces Russian culture, and she really deliberately goes about building these alliances within the court.
Oh, so she knew how to play the game.
She was a quick study.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture here. But what about this Peter III guy? I mean, he's the Tsar, right? Didn't he have anything to say about all this?
Well, to put it mildly, their marriage was a little rocky.
A little.
Yeah. Peter was, how should I put it, known for his eccentricities.
Eccentricities, okay. That's one way to put it.
And to make matters worse, after the 7 Years' War, his pro-Prussian policies, well, they did not go over well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because at that point, Russia and Prussia were pretty much sworn enemies.
Right.
So I can see why people wouldn't be too thrilled with a leader who seemed to be, siding with their enemy.
You're catching on quick. It was definitely a recipe for disaster. And Catherine, well, she'd been busy making those connections within the court, and she saw her chance.
So this wasn't just some love story gone wrong. This was a strategic power move.
Oh, absolutely. She orchestrated a coup d'etat, got the military on her side, and basically forced Peter to abdicate.
Wow. So she takes the throne. She's now Catherine the Great. What does she do?
Well, one thing you absolutely can't ignore is the massive expansion Russia went through under her rule.
How massive are we talking?
I'm talking about adding over 520,000 square kilometers to the empire.
Oh, okay, hold on. Put that in perspective for me.
Think of it this way. That's basically like adding a whole other France to the map.
That's a lot of land.
It is. We're talking Crimea, huge chunks of Ukraine, and even pieces of Poland. She wasn't messing around.
So she clearly knew how to throw her weight around. But how did she pull off such a massive land grab? Was she just that good at war?
She was definitely no stranger to military might, that's for sure. She had some seriously talented military leaders at her disposal, like Alexander Suvorov. Even today, he's still considered one of Russia's all-time great military minds.
Yeah, I've heard that name.
But it wasn't all just brute force either. Catherine was also incredibly good at diplomacy.
Okay, so give me an example. What kind of diplomatic moves are we talking about?
All right, so there's this story about her triumphal procession through Crimea in 1787.
Triumphal procession. Sounds fancy.
It was. It was meant to be this grand spectacle of, Russian power and influence.
Oh.
The funny thing is, it actually ended up kind of contributing to the next Russo-Turkish war.
Wait, hold on. So you're telling me a victory parade helped start another war?
Kinda, yeah. It's wild, right?
How does that even happen?
Well, the Ottomans saw this whole procession as a direct threat. Like, Catherine was just flaunting her power right in their faces.
I can see how that would rub them the wrong way.
It did, and it played right into all the existing tensions between them, basically pushing them closer to conflict.
So even meticulously planned events can have unintended consequences, huh?
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, did Catherine underestimate how the Ottomans would react? Or was this all part of some long game? Was she intentionally provoking them as an excuse to grab more land?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It seems like she was always thinking a few steps ahead.
Always. It's something we'll definitely want to keep in mind as we, dig deeper into her reign.
All right. So we've established that she was a major force in both military and diplomatic matters.
Oh, without a doubt.
But then there's this other side to her, right? This whole image of her as an enlightened ruler. Which honestly seems a little at odds with, all the wars and the empire building.
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
How so?
Catherine was a huge admirer of the Enlightenment.
Interesting.
She exchanged letters with Voltaire, championed things like the arts and education, and even tried to push through some pretty significant legal reforms.
So she wasn't just focused on conquering territory. She was also trying to bring about social change, like within Russia itself.
You got it.
Hmm. Okay, that adds another layer to her. So she's bringing in new ideas, new forms of art. It sounds like she was really trying to, elevate Russia's position in the world.
That's exactly it. I mean, she founded the Hermitage Museum, the one that houses one of the world's greatest art collections.
I've heard of it, yeah.
She promoted Russian literature and opera. She brought in European intellectuals. It was a whole movement.
That's pretty progressive, so especially for the 18th century. But was she really committed to these ideas? Or was it all just for show? Was she just using it to boost her own image and consolidate her power?
Well, that's what we're here to figure out, isn't it? And to do that, we got to take a closer look at some of her specific actions and the impact they had on Russian society as a whole.
So, what were some of the most impactful things she tried to do? Any specific reforms stand out?
One big one was her Grand Commission.
The Grand Commission, okay. What was that all about?
This was this massive project, aimed at basically rewriting Russian law and tackling some of the empire's biggest problems.
Like what kind of problems?
Social issues, economic stuff, you name it. It was this bold move, an attempt to create change through reason and thoughtful discussion, very much in line with that whole Enlightenment thinking she loved.
Sounds promising. So, did it work? Did she succeed?
Well, not exactly. The commission ran into a lot of resistance, particularly from the nobility. They were pretty invested in keeping their power and privilege. And this brings us to one of the most complicated and kind of contradictory parts of Catherine's rule serfdom.
Right, serfdom. That's where peasants were basically tied to the land, right? And pretty much owned by their landlords. Not exactly a shining example of freedom and enlightenment, if you ask me. So how did Catherine handle this whole serfdom situation?
Yeah, that's the tricky part. On the one hand, she knew serfdom was a problem. She even wrote about it in her instructions for that Grand Commission we were talking about.
So she was aware of the issues.
But then on the other hand, she was terrified of social unrest, especially after Pugachev's rebellion.
Oh, right, that massive peasant uprising. I bet that shook things up a bit.
It did. It really did. And that fear of instability basically overshadowed any desire she had to actually reform the system.
So in the end, she chose stability over reform.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, she made a few small attempts to improve things for the serfs, but nothing too drastic, nothing that would risk rocking the boat too much.
It's a bit of a mixed bag then.
Yeah.
She buys into those Enlightenment ideals, but only up to a point. It seems like real change was only okay as long as it didn't threaten her own grip on power.
That's a pretty good assessment.
So was she a true enlightened despot, like some historians claim? Or was she just a really clever politician who used the language of progress and enlightenment to strengthen her own position?
That's the question, isn't it? And to really understand that, we've got to look beyond just her political actions. We need to get to know the woman behind them.
All right, I'm intrigued. Let's talk about Catherine, the woman, then. What was she like?
Well, she was full of surprises, that's for sure. She was known for her sharp wit, her love of the arts, and let's just say her personal life was pretty colorful.
Ah, yes, the infamous love affairs. We can't talk about Catherine the Great without getting into those. But I'm curious, were these relationships just a personal thing? Or did they play a role in her political machinations?
That's a great question. And, with Catherine, the answer is always more complicated than you think.
I'm starting to see that.
Some of those relationships were definitely more important than others, both personally and in terms of how they affected her rule.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more. Which lovers had the biggest impact on her time as Empress? All right, so we left off talking about Catherine's, let's call it her active love life.
Active is one way to put it.
So was it all just, a bit of fun? Or were these relationships part of some grand scheme, some, political strategy?
That's the question, isn't it? And like with most things, Catherine, it's not a simple answer. Some relationships definitely meant more than others, on a personal level and when it came to politics.
Okay, spill the tea. Which of these levers actually mattered when it came to her ruling?
Well, Grigory Potemkin, he stands out for sure.
Potemkin.
Their connection, it was passionate, For sure influential, and it went on for years. Even when the romance cooled down, they were close. Confidants, political allies, the whole deal.
Wait, Potemkin, as in the Potemkin villages guy. I've always wondered, was that story even real? Did he actually build fake villages just to impress Catherine?
That Potemkin villages thing, probably not true, probably more of a tall tale, but it shows you the kind of, lavish stuff, big displays that Potemkin was known for. He was all about spectacle and a brilliant strategist on top of that.
So he was more than just arm candy. This guy had real influence.
Oh, absolutely. He was crucial in Russia's expansion south, especially around Crimea and the Black Sea. And the military, modernizing it, pushing Catherine's vision of Russia as this major power in Europe. Potemkin was right there with her.
Wow, so these personal relationships could really shake things up on a global scale. It's crazy. But did people ever criticize Catherine for all these fairs? This was the 1700s, wasn't it?
Yeah, you'd think so, right? But Catherine, she was really good at navigating those double standards. She basically said, look, I'm a woman ruling, deal with it.
She wasn't playing by their rules. But how'd she pull that off without everyone at court or, the whole country turning against her?
She was smart, charismatic, seriously. Could charm anyone, outmaneuver anyone who got in her way, and good judge of character, which was probably pretty important when picking your lovers.
So it wasn't just about, who was good looking. These were calculated moves.
A lot of them, yeah. Catherine got that power wasn't all about, armies and stuff. It was influence, convincing people, having the right people backing you up. And those lovers, whether they were military guys, advisors, or just someone she could trust, they helped her keep that power.
Smart. But still, think about it. Balancing your own personal life with running a whole empire. That's got to be tough.
Did she ever, let her feelings get in the way of making good decisions?
It's hard to know for sure. She was really good at keeping things separate, ruthless and calculated when she had to be, but also capable of deep affection and, loyalty.
I guess that's what it takes to survive in that world. But even with all her brains and charm, there had to be some pushback, right? Especially from the guys who felt threatened by a powerful woman. Oh, for sure. There are these accounts from foreign ambassadors. Pretty interesting, actually. They often criticized her, saying she had female weaknesses.
Female weaknesses? What does that even mean?
Things like vanity, loving flattery, that kind of stuff.
Oh, please. Sounds like they were just intimidated by a woman who was smarter than them.
Probably. But Catherine, she didn't let them get to her. She wanted to prove a woman could rule, and rule well.
And she did. I mean, come on. She expanded Russia, revamped the military, brought in the biggest thinkers of the time. She definitely left her mark on history. Not bad for, a German princess who started with basically nothing.
It's amazing when you think about it. Shows you what ambition, a little bit of brains, and breaking the rules can do.
So back to our big question.
Mhm.
Enlightened ruler or just a really good politician? Where do we land on that?
It's a question historians still debate, And the more we learn about Catherine, the more complicated the answer gets. She liked Enlightenment ideas, truly believed in progress and all that. But she also used those ideas to, solidify her own power. It's like she was a product of her time, shaped by how things were back then.
So she was both, kinda. A visionary, but also a pragmatist. She had big dreams, but also knew how to play the power game.
You got it. And that's what makes her so interesting to study. Not a saint, not a villain. Complex, contradictory. And people are still arguing about her legacy today.
It sounds like there's no easy answer then. No clear-cut good or bad.
Exactly. And that's kind of the beauty of history, isn't it? Makes you think critically, question what you think you know, and really grapple with how complicated people are.
So if we can't just say Catherine was good or bad, enlightened or a tyrant, what can we learn from her story?
Well, I think it shows us that power can be a dangerous thing. You can use it for good, for bad, and most of the time it's a little bit of both. And it reminds us that even the most powerful people are still human, driven by their emotions, what they want, their ambitions. And those things shape what they do and ultimately the course of history.
That's deep. Makes you think, what if Catherine hadn't been born into a world where being a woman meant you were automatically at a disadvantage when it came to power? What could she have done if she didn't have to deal with all those expectations and limitations?
Now, that's a question we could spend hours talking about. But unfortunately, we're running out of time for today's deep dive.
Oh, man. Okay, so let's do a quick recap. We've covered a lot. Her rise to power, the military stuff, her personal life, and that whole thing about the Enlightenment and how she fit into it. It's been quite a journey.
Okay, so we've talked about, all the political stuff, the wars, even her love life, but what gets me is how she just, blew past all those expectations people had for women back then. Empress, a lover, supporting the arts, writing all the time. How did she do it all?
It's honestly amazing. It shows you how much energy she had, her discipline, just pure willpower. Catherine was famous for working, like nonstop.
Really?
Up at 5 a.m., going through reports, writing letters, meeting advisors, all before most people even had their coffee, probably.
And she'd squeeze in all that other stuff, the
Right.
art, the books, the lovers.
Yep, somehow.
Got to be tough to fit it all in.
I'd say so. But Catherine, she seemed to thrive on it. Always learning, always pushing her influence further, never satisfied.
Sounds tiring, honestly.
Yeah.
But also kind of exciting. Did she ever, chill out, or was it
Right.
go, go, go all the time? Well, there were some tough times, personal tragedies, political stuff that must hit her hard, but she always bounced back, stronger each time.
That's pretty impressive.
Hmm?
Do you think that's what let her succeed? Like being able to just keep going no matter what?
It helped, for sure. But also, she could adapt, learn from mistakes, never underestimated anyone who might try to take her down. She knew how people saw her, and she used that to her advantage.
So it wasn't just about being powerful. She was smart about how she used that power.
Exactly. And that's why she's so fascinating to study. She wasn't all good, wasn't all bad either. Just this complex person who did some amazing things and some not so amazing things. And even now, people still debate what her legacy really is.
Which brings us back to, like, the big question, right? Was she really an enlightened ruler? Or just a politician playing the part to get what she wanted?
I don't think there's one right answer. We've seen both sides of it.
Yeah.
She liked those Enlightenment ideas, believed in reason and progress, all that. But she also used those ideas to make her rule seem more legitimate, to hold on to power. It's like she was a woman of her time, shaped by the world she lived in.
So both, then. A visionary and someone who knew how to work the system. Kind of makes her even more interesting, actually.
Totally. And I think that's the main thing we can take away from all this. Catherine the Great was full of contradictions.
Yeah.
Tough, but caring, ambitious, but loved learning. She supported the Enlightenment, but also, kept some of the systems the Enlightenment was trying to change. It's complicated.
It's like, to really understand her, you got to look at the whole picture, not just try to put her in a box.
Exactly. And that's what makes history so cool. It's rarely simple,
Right.
It's all about nuance, different perspectives, and I think that's what makes it so fun to explore.
Well said. And I think that's a great place to wrap things up. We've covered a lot about Catherine the Great today, but honestly, it feels like we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to her story, so many ways to look at it.
Yeah, that's the beauty of these deep dives. You start with some questions, and you end up with even more. Makes you want to keep learning.
So, to everyone listening, don't stop here. Go check out what Catherine wrote herself. Read different biographies, and decide for yourselves what you think about her.
Cool.
And most importantly, don't be afraid to, question the usual stories you hear and embrace how complicated history really is.
Because that's where you find the really interesting stuff.
Until next time, happy deep diving. Tell us what you think about this episode. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.